My name is Morris Panner, and I'm the CEO of Ambra Health. And Ambra Health has done a variety of efforts in cloud image management. So Amazon was a pretty natural partner for us, and let me talk a little bit about how exactly we have worked with them and what we've done. So let's go to the next slide. So we are a class category leader in image exchange and really have done that and more at 5 of the top 5 academic medical centers in the US, as well as 6 of the top 10 children's hospitals in the United States. So have really been having a wonderful opportunity to work with different organizations. Next slide. So this, I think, is the most important depending on what your orientation is. And I'm going to take the orientation that you're looking at this through one of 2 lenses. Either you're a developer partner who's trying to think about how you could do more with AWS and or advance your own efforts, or you are a health system or physician group that is trying to figure out how to think about platforms. So those are the 2 perspectives and the 2 lenses that I'm going to give. So what do we do together? And to give you some perspective, we have about 500 customers. Well, actually 600 customers, 100 of them outside of the United States. So for us, the most logical and quickest relationship with Amazon was twofold. One was to handle kind of bursting capacity challenges that we otherwise couldn't scale up for rapidly, but also for international compliance. So right now, we run AW instances in Germany, Singapore, Japan, and Canada. And that gave us very quickly a unique ability to leapfrog our competitors in certain ways because we were able to undertake that. We also, and this is very important, depending on whether you are and I'm trying to make sure everyone can hear, let me know if you can, it's a little tricky, but we'll persevere. If you are thinking about your own profile, you will often find that some of your customers have already started running in Amazon environments. And one of the things that was particularly important for us was to move to S3 and be able to provide the kind of storage performance price equation that you would want for large-scale data equations. So one of the things that we can offer to our customers is to run our software effectively in an Amazon environment. What's been interesting about that, and what the question always kind of occurs is, are you kind of enabling your future competition? And I think that's, to be fair, an open question. But the way Amazon has approached it so far, and I actually kind of believe it, is they've said, you don't have to believe us because it's not based on trust, it's based on business model. The Amazon business model doesn't really work in what are relatively small verticals. So if you say we can win a third of a $3 billion vertical, they're like, that's interesting, but that's not kind of how we scale. And what we'd rather do is enable partners to accomplish that because the downstream for us is so much better. So we've had a lot of confidence in investing in the relationship because we think the business models align. Will that be true forever? I don't know, but I think it's true right now. And then the third is, one of the things that Amazon wants you to do is use tools that you might not want to build that do scale for them horizontally. So the tools that we're using here are actually not healthcare specific tools. One was originally designed to mask credit card numbers, and then we modified it. Now, masking financial data is an enormous horizontal opportunity, which an e-commerce giant would understand. Masking pixel level images inside of ultrasounds is a less compelling global market. For us, the opposite. We find it extraordinarily compelling, so we don't care as much about credit card numbers. We're happy to mask those, and we understand that, but the special value we add is something around medical imaging. So those are the 3 areas, and I actually think it pretty much touches on what an Amazon partner, or the rationale of what you would encounter as a customer you would see from the people who are providing within the environment. Does that help? Are there questions? That's kind of the orientation for today. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little less about Amazon and a little bit more about the market opportunity that we're going after. So this may or may not be interesting to you depending on how excited you are. Well, actually at RSNA, I'm lucky. You actually are excited about medical imaging or you wouldn't be here, so that's lucky. Usually this is the part where half the people walk out, but this is good. The first thing that is happening at a global scale is the data that used to be stored is now very much a living object, and you need to be able to understand the cost and access equations to be able to efficiently use data. And it used to be people would ask you, could you please build tools to burn off our data after 7 years, depending on the state, after 99 years for X or Y. And now the default position for most people is we'd like to keep our data forever, and we'd like to figure out how to use it. And we'd also like to figure out how to segment it and curate it and use it in a more effective way. So that's a big challenge, and one, interestingly enough, that I think Amazon has been confronting for a long time outside of healthcare, but is very much now a living object inside healthcare. The other very tied to that is diagnostic discovery. Yes, question? Yeah, so the question was, is this really a concern of academic medicine, or is it a concern more generally? I would have thought, and to give you a sense of it, I would have thought it would have been a little bit more academic focused. It turns out that the drivers of this in the democratization of therapy delivery push it well outside of academic medicine. So right now, for example, the most innovative, I shouldn't say this, be careful, there is no more innovative scenario for oncology treatment than outside the hospital. And so these kinds of factors are transitioning where you would acquire data and who would use data. So we are finding it to be much less of a academic-only concern, although clearly that's where we have the early reference customers. Yes, they are. And so one of the things I think also that happens in healthcare, which is interesting, as you probably know, is it's a little bit of a follow the leader environment where having those early credibility customers matters more. And I get that as a patient. I'm not interested going to the person who says, we're taking massive risk on you. I typically don't want to hear that. I want to hear that this has been done a lot of times and is really safe. But very tied to that is diagnostic discovery. One of the things that is happening in oncology and neurodegenerative diseases is just an unbelievably interesting time where they're using autoimmune responses to reconfigure therapies. And that is really just as fascinating and as exciting a thing to be part of. But it takes data and it starts to mush that into a world where people are both discovering and then doing prospective delivery and analysis. And that's not an easy thing to do, and you have to have a very agile system. You don't typically want to store it deeply and then try to extract it. You want it to be a real-time fluid, almost like you were doing financial analysis, watching a real-time performance of an enterprise. It looks more like that. And then the third is a lack of interoperability. I think no secret that right now the dominant method of translation of information and transportation of information is literally physical. So more than anything else is a CD moves data, or in large cases people move servers. And this really changes, the cloud changes all that and creates interoperability at scale. And then finally, PACS is really becoming a workflow tool as opposed to the dominant storage and default administrative environment. So that's really the challenges that we see flowing through the environment. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. So let me go back and sort of talk about the referenceability and sort of back to your question about research. And where we started is in the high-end research institutions to do trials. And so that's where the bulk of our referenceability is today. We're starting to see it in oncology practices. So we right now have some ambulatory organizations that are doing serious research. But what gives people really enormous confidence is somebody like the vice chair of research at the University of Cincinnati. She's a very insightful person and has had certain barriers that she was unable to overcome. What we did is we were able to take the tooling that Amazon provides, take cloud environments that Amazon provides, and then take what we provide, which is the actual workflow and the augmentation of the tooling. So literally our developers take Amazon tooling and soup it up. no offense to the Amazon developers, it's already perfect for what it was purpose-built for, but it's not built for this other component. And they let us do that. And then the idea is to kind of put that back into the Amazon ecosystem, and that's one of the ways commercially we're hoping to make progress. Does that make sense? I can talk more about what a research PACS does if people are specifically interested in that. It's one of the challenges that everyone has a PACS, but they're very nervous about dirtying it up and having access inappropriately, and you need a different environment for manipulating that kind of stuff. Correct. So for that purpose, we're a VNA in the cloud with a viewer on top and the workflow tools that let you de-identify, anonymize, and categorize. So it's a little bit of a combo of the two. So what we did, and I'll show you maybe the next slide has it. Let's go to the next slide, because we'll go back to this slide. So this is a good example. We took these two tools and modified them to be able to create this. So these two tools out of the box can't do this. But now Amazon lets us provide back commercially their tools with our enhanced capabilities. So we can make money off of that process. So what's interesting is this was originally designed for credit card masking, I think. And then the pixel level was designed for something else. And we were able to take both of those and create that. So you can see here inside the marketplace, we can kind of cannibalize these features and sell them in a way that is a value-added service on top of what Amazon would otherwise provide, if that makes sense. So why don't we go back just for one slide. So this really sort of shows you, this is us, and everything is an API-based set of calls, which is why we're able to sell it and why we're able to productize it, because it all comes through a API, RESTful API. So that was important, and they let you do that. So it's really something that we can manipulate as we see fit, and we can productize it as we see fit. So we can go back to the next one. So let me just stop on this slide for a second. The challenges inside of healthcare data for imaging, there's two. One is a natural language, an NLP-based challenge where you're trying to anonymize reports. And then the second is the pixel level data. And one of the things that's really interesting is you have to be able to tie the two together. And most imaging doesn't have pixel level data, but ultrasound is one that happens to have it quite frequently. One of the things that you can do once you start doing that is you can start running comparisons between reports, because although it's anonymized here, we know what's underneath there and what's showing in the image. So you can give people a lot of ability to even do quality checking, other things like that, within a large population set. So that's a really important set of innovations that comes out of this, and you can do very highly customized indexing of data, because you don't see this, but the computer can. So you can look at be HIPAA compliant and IRB compliant in what you're trying to do and be able to manage this. So obviously in the life sciences, there's probably no more interesting area right now than taking genomic and proteomic data, merging it with imaging, and trying to really understand outcomes of basic research. And next slide. So you can sort of read the slide, and I've sort of touched on this. But what's interesting about all this is we really are if you think of us as a transport, storage, and viewing layer, we enable all of this to happen within the context of a cloud environment. And what is nice about that is you now are able to work across borders and across boundaries in a way that you couldn't otherwise. So we run our own data center. But increasingly, if somebody says, and this is an interesting challenge for us, if someone says, we really want to run your stuff in Malaysia, and you see a lot of interest around the globe in innovations in imaging, it's why RSNA is such a global meeting. you want to be as close as you can be to the various locations that you're working in. We started out, believe it or not, trying to scale physical data centers. We had a really good relationship inside of the United Kingdom, and we're working with the National Health Service, so we actually built another co-location center in the UK. That's not a perfect way to go if you don't have to, and this was a pretty powerful way to do this. And we've been able to really speed up the process of curation and manipulating images in a pretty powerful way. We have our own sort of vision around this, which is that as research and patient care merge, it becomes a very powerful thing. You know, we're working with an AI company like Rapid. We're starting to see some of the innovations that you can imagine when you're taking real-time AI. We don't write the AI, but the same kind of API-first approach lets you put something in the cloud and deliver that in a way that you otherwise would be forced to drop a physical server. And in some cases, the workflow doesn't even work because you're trying to move people remotely. And so in those cases, it's really an ideal kind of marriage. And all of that is enabled by this kind of structure. I think I may be close to the end of my presentation. Have a moment or two for questions. Yeah. So if there are any other questions, that would be great. I think the highlight is the takeaways from our presentation are to understand how the cloud platform functions and the benefits that it gives you, and then depending on what your orientation is, how the commercial relationships work with Amazon and how developing companies, and I think almost any company in America would say they were a small company relative to Amazon, so you're always wondering how that relationship works. I'm happy to talk to that. And then obviously it enables a lot of innovative partnerships, and that's pretty exciting for us as well.